young person, Mr. Trudeau is saying, you know, you're not worth universal pharmacare, that the big pharmacare companies or big pharmaceuticals are more important. I want to say to that young person, with the new Democratic government, we will bring in universal pharmacare for all. You would use your health card, not your credit card for medication.
Mr. Singh, thank you. Mr. Scheer, it's your opportunity now.
Well, Conservatives have always recognized the importance of working with provinces. We respect provincial jurisdiction, but we also understand that it will take federal leadership to get certain things done, like interprovincial free trade, something that Mr. Trudeau has failed to accomplish. But one thing I can promise voters across the country is that premiers won't have to take a Conservative government to court to fight things like the carbon tax. And Mr. Trudeau has imposed his carbon tax on provinces that don't want to go along with his high-cost scheme. This carbon tax is increasing the cost of everyday essentials like gasoline, home heating, and groceries, and it will only go up after the next election. He is refusing to tell Canadians how high his carbon tax will go if he's re-elected. The Conservative government, under my leadership, will scrap the carbon tax.
Mr. Scheer, thank you. Ms. May.
Thank you, Susan, for the question. It's very important, and as Greens, cooperation is in our DNA. None of the problems we face are going to be solved if we keep arguing and fighting with each other, whether it's within Parliament, in our different parties, or between the federal government, the provinces, and the territories. The Greens are proposing a reinvigorated form of federalism. Modeled after what has been done in Australia, we want a Council of Canadian Governments. So the federal government, provincial, territorial, municipal and the local orders of government need a seat at the table. So too do Indigenous leadership, First Nations, Métis and Inuit, around the same table, finding common ground on urgent issues like healthcare, on the climate emergency, and working together in the public interest.
Okay, Ms. May, thank you. Mr. Blanchet, your opportunity.
Thank you. If I remember well, I've seen a study today from Mr. Éric Montigny saying that this campaign is not about federal issues, but about provincial and Quebec issues. And this is not a surprise. If you want cooperation with provinces or Quebec, you need to respect the jurisdiction. And something that you have to stop doing, and this is one of the demands of the government of Quebec on many issues, is giving a hand to our money being held hostage by the federal government and giving back to us with conditions. The money that has to be given to provinces in their own fields of jurisdiction should be given back without conditions.
Mr. Blanchet, thank you. Mr. Trudeau, your opportunity now.
In 10 years of Stephen Harper's government, he chose to stop meeting with premiers and first ministers' meetings. And we restarted that when we took office in 2015. We were able to strengthen the CPP for a generation. We were able to sign historic health accords with massive investments in home care and in mental health. We were able to invest in infrastructure like housing and public transit across the country. And we continued to work with provinces on renegotiating a NAFTA that had everyone playing on one Team Canada. But yes, with certain provinces right now, we're fighting on the defining issue of our time because Jason Kenney and Doug Ford and other Conservative premiers don't want to do anything on climate change. And we need a government in Ottawa that is going to fight them and fight for Canadians on climate change, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
We will have the open debate coming up very shortly. We are going to switch gears now, though, and give a leader a chance to ask any other leader a question on any topic they choose. Again, the order of this was chosen by random draw. The first leader this time is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Mr. Singh, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Trudeau. You know, you talk often about how Conservatives cut taxes for the wealthy and cut education and healthcare and other services. I agree with you, and I've heard you say this often. So my question is, you criticize Mr. Harper on his climate targets, but you failed to achieve them. You criticize Mr. Harper on the fact that he cut healthcare funding, and you also cut them. You criticize Mr. Harper and Conservatives on giving billions to billionaires and corporations, but you gave $14 billion more. My question is this: why do you keep letting down the people that voted for you?
First thing we did was cut taxes for the middle class and raise them for the wealthiest 1%. And on climate change, after 10 years of Stephen Harper doing nothing, in just 4 years, we've reached 3/4 of the way to our 2030 targets, which we will meet and surpass. But we know that's not enough. We're going to continue to do more, like planting 2 billion trees, like moving forward on giving money upfront so people can retrofit their homes, on making Canada net zero by 2050. We know how important it is to move forward, and right now, Mr. Scheer has promised that the first thing he would do is rip up the only real plan to fight climate change that Canada has ever had. These are the things we're going to be moving forward on because Canadians expect us to. We lifted 900,000 people out of poverty with our investments in families, with the Canada Child Benefit, and things that actually, Mr. Scheer and Mr. Singh, the NDP voted against. We will continue to invest in families because it's creating jobs and helping people out of poverty, because that's what Canadians expect, and that's what we will continue to do.
Now the leaders have an opportunity to have the open debate on this question. It's for 4 minutes. Mr. Singh, you may begin.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I mean, we look at the track record of this government, and in reality, Statistics Canada points out in 2017, the wealthiest actually paid less in tax and gained more in wealth. And when we look at one of the biggest problems that we're faced with as a country is offshore tax havens. Now, not only did your finance minister use offshore tax havens, but also the president of the Treasury Board. She also used offshore tax havens. So how can you tell Canadians we don't have the money to fund things like universal pharmacare when your top 2 cabinet ministers don't pay their fair share?
Mr. Scheer, you might remember that, Mr. Singh, you might remember that summer
I'm very different from Mr. Scheer.
You got it.
You got it. I mean,
you look so alike, it's really difficult for me.
There's nothing in common here, man.
We had a huge fight with the wealthiest Canadians and the Conservatives when we closed tax loopholes that Mr. Scheer is going to reopen and give tax breaks worth $50,000 to the wealthiest Canadians. We're going to keep moving forward in a way that invests in Canadians.
Mr. Trudeau, we'll give Mr. Scheer an opportunity to respond.
You called small business owners tax cheats. You called entrepreneurs who have created jobs and opportunities in our society tax sheets, all the while protecting your trust fund and those of your billionaire friends. What we are doing is lowering taxes for all Canadians. We've got a universal tax cut that will lower the first bracket, that will save $850 for the average income couple. We are going to bring in tax credits for kids' sports.
Yes, for sure. What they are doing, they are spending, and
tax cuts are not
everybody
spending.
Here on the
tax cuts
stage,
are
everybody here on the
pockets of
stage
Canadians.
are spending more money. And you cannot create wealth when the government is spending money. You must have the right policies for the entrepreneur, actually. We want the private sector to be able to invest. The private sector will create wealth.
That's why we're going to undo his tax hikes.
You won't balance the budget. Nobody will balance the budget.
His tax hikes.
I cannot understand. You'd like the opportunity.
At the beginning of this segment, Mr. Singh pointed out that Mr. Trudeau has not changed the climate targets from those of Mr. Harper. It needs to be said very clearly, and I'm so disappointed because I believed the Liberals in 2015 that they would go with science-based, evidence-based policies. But the target that Mr. Trudeau is saying he will hit by 2030 is a target for losing the fight against climate change because it ignores the science, it ignores the IPCC advice. On this stage tonight, the Green Party is the only party with a plan, Mission Possible, that will actually protect us.
A plan that will destroy the economy. A plan that will destroy the economy.
You know that's not true.
It is
true. That's not true.
Yours is 38% below 2005.
Our plan is to stay in line with science. Our plan is this.
Which science did you find that Mr. Singh
Our plan is in line with the IPCC report, and it's to keep warming within 1.5 degrees, which you love to say, and it's very important, and I agree with you.
I love to say it.
You do, which is very important, and it's a very important thing.
Because it's about our children's survival, which I love to protect.
To take on the climate crisis that we're in, it's going to require the courage to fight big polluters. It's going to take the courage to stand up to the massive lobbyists that Mr. Trudeau has caved into, and the reason why we continue to pay subsidies to the fossil fuel sector. We would immediately end those subsidies if formed.
The experts are agreed that what a climate plan needs to do is to be ambitious and doable. And of the plans that are forward here on this stage, there is only one plan that the experts have qualified as both ambitious and doable, and that is the plan that we have begun to put in place over the past 4 years.
Last word.
Mr. Trudeau's plan is failing. It is making everything more expensive for hardworking Canadians, and he has granted a massive exemption to the country's largest emitters.
That's not true,
Our plan takes the climate change fight global, recognizing that Canada can do more to fight climate change by exporting our clean technology and helping other countries lower their emissions.
And that concludes, that is all the time we have for the open debate. That concludes this segment. You had an opportunity, you got to jump right in. So thank you all very much for the conclusion of that segment.
Hello, I'm Althea Raj from HuffPost Canada, and the theme of this segment is polarization, human rights, and immigration. And we'll begin with my question to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Mr. Singh, I want to ask you about Bill 21. Your campaign is about courage, but you have not shown the courage to fight Quebec's discriminatory law. It bars individuals who, like yourself, wear religious symbols from some provincial employment. If you were Prime Minister, would you stand back and allow another province to discriminate against its citizens? Aren't you, and frankly, the other leaders on the stage, putting your own party's interests in Quebec ahead of your principles and the equality rights of all citizens? You have a minute to answer.
Sure. It's probably pretty obvious to folks that I am obviously against Bill 21. It is something that hurts me, makes me feel sad. I think about all the times I grew up being told that I couldn't do things because of the way I looked. And I think about all the people in Canada that grow up being told they can't achieve more because of their identity or who they are. And I think about the people in Quebec right now that are being told just because they wear a hijab that they can't be a teacher, or if they wear a yarmulke, they can't be a judge. And that's hurtful and it's wrong. And it probably comes as no surprise that I'm opposed to laws that divide people. And what I do every single day when I go to Quebec is I say, hey, I'm here. I'm someone that believes in fighting the climate crisis. I'm someone that believes in firmly and unequivocally the rights of women, the right of women to choose and to build more access to abortion services. I believe firmly in making sure we tackle the powerful corporations that are influencing government and that are not allowing, that are challenging our ability to ensure that we build services that lift up people. I'm doing that every single day.
Thank you. Mr. Scheer, you and Mr. Singh may debate this question.
Well, Mr. Singh, I just want to start off by congratulating you on the way that you have handled so many issues around race and identity. As someone who has been the victim of these types of racist acts in the past, I certainly believe you have handled it with a lot of class, especially as it relates to some of the scandals that have come out during this campaign. I believe it's very important for people to understand that while we will not intervene in this court case as a Conservative government, we do recognize, and the Conservative Party always stands for freedom and equality and individual liberty, and we will make sure that this does. We will not pursue this type of bill at the federal level.
I want to just touch on one of the themes of this discussion is polarization. And while Bill 21 is going to single out people because of the way they look, another thing that's happening in our country right now is that people are being pit against each other. And what's happening is people who can't find a home, can't afford their bills, can't get the medication or health care they need, are being told that it's not the fault of powerful corporations and those who are not paying their fair share, but it's a fault of new Canadians. It's a fault of a 12-year-old refugee or an immigrant who's breaking his back working 12 hours a day. And that's why it's so important for us to tackle economic insecurity if we want to tackle the polarization.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer and Mr. Singh. Ms. May, you may debate Mr. Singh on this question.
Yeah, I want to also echo Andrew's comments because I think that Jagmeet has done, as we all have done through this rather strange period of an election campaign, confronting issues of privilege. And anyone with white skin has privilege. But when we look at Bill 21 in Quebec, I think it challenges all of us. Like the NDP, the Green Party opposes Bill 21. And then we're left with the question of what is the best way for a federal government to protect human rights within Quebec. Quebecers are fighting this out within Quebec. Quebec groups are going to court to say that Bill 21 discriminates. And as that goes forward, we are, frankly, looking at a situation where we don't want to do anything that hurts that debate within Quebec.
I understand. You know, what I want to also just touch on, while Bill 21 is, of course, polarizing, on that point, I know you agree with me on this, that we've got to tackle those, the powerful corporations that are not paying their fair share, and that's part of the reason why people aren't able to earn a good living and part of the reason why people can't find housing or they can't get the medication they need, because those at the top aren't paying their fair share.
It's not even about
we can't
paying
build
their
in,
fair share. I think
we can't even build in the services.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. May, thank you. Ms. May, thank you. Mr. Blanchet, your turn to debate Mr. Singh.
With 70%.
I'll give you more than 10 seconds.
You're nice. With 70% of the population of Quebec supporting the Bill 21 and 70% of the members of Parliament in Quebec supporting Bill 21, it's hardly a polarization issue in Quebec. That's the problem. The problem is that, and in English tonight, it will be quite clear. Everybody here has problems with the very idea of, I will say laïcité because there's no exact translation for that word in English. Everybody has a problem with it, but say in best of cases that they would tolerate it. But Quebec does not need to be told what to do or what not to do about its own values,
Mr. Blanchet,
nor its language,
Mr.
nor
Blanchet,
themselves as a nation.
This is a bill that just says to people, because of the way they look, that they can't do a job.
You
And
know
that's-
this
that's
is
wrong.
not true.
And instead
Madam,
of that,
you know this is not true, and your tweet that said that I said
instead of that,
people,
Mr.
the way
Blanchet,
the
what we
people
should be
look
doing
was wrong.
Mr. Blanchet, instead of what we should be doing is let's protect women's rights. Let's build
That's
up more protections for a woman's right to choose.
What does means in the context I used it?
Let's build up more protections for the LGBTQ community. Let's build up more protections in society to build a society where there is a
Okay, thank
separation
you,
of church and
Mr.
state.
Blanchet. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh can debate this question.
Mr. Singh, you have spoken very eloquently about discrimination and fought against it all your life. And that's why it's so surprising to have heard you say, like every other leader on the stage, that a federal government under you would not intervene in the question of Bill 21 in Quebec. It's a question where, yes, it's awkward politically because, as Mr. Blanchet says, it is very popular. But I am the only one on the stage who has said, yes, a federal government might have to intervene on this because the federal government needs to protect minority rights, needs to protect language rights, needs to protect women's rights, and needs to do that right across the country. You didn't say that you would possibly intervene.
Trudeau,
you didn't even leave the door open, and that's not leadership.
Let's be honest for a second here. Every single day of my life is fighting a bill like Bill 21.
So why
every
won't
single
you
day
fight
of my
it
life
if you form government?
Every single day of my life is challenging people who think that you can't do things because of the way you look. Every single day of my life, I channel the frustrations of people who feel that as well, that many people across our country who are told that they can't achieve what they want because of how they look.
So why
I'm
not
running to become
act
Prime Minister
on your
of this
convictions
country, and I'm going to
and leave
Quebec
the
and telling
door
people,
open
I want to be
to
your Prime Minister.
challenging it?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Singh, Mr. Vernier, your chance to go head-to-head with Mr. Singh.
Yes, about the Bill 21, we must respect the Constitution. And we won't interfere at the federal level. That's the decision from the provincial government. And that's what we must do. But also, Mr. Singh, you said that you didn't want me to be here on the stage to have a discussion with you. So you're for diversity. But what about diversity of opinion? I have the right to have another opinion about immigration. And I don't know why you're not, you're a leader and you must try to have everybody on your side. But are you believing in free speech? Are you believing in free speech only when people are saying things that you want to hear?
You're asking the question, let me answer it. After a couple of minutes of this debate tonight, I think people can clearly see why I didn't think you should deserve a platform. The comments that you're making, the type of things you say, there's one thing to say that you disagree with somebody, that's fine. But when you incite hatred, when you incite division,
no, I don't. It's not true.
You
cannot say that.
You insult a young girl
I just want to have a debate.
Ask about her mental stability. It shows a lack of judgment. You don't deserve a platform, and I'm happy to challenge you on that because your ideas are hurtful to Canada. I will always work to build unity and bring people together.
Unity for
okay,
people
thank you
who
very
agree
much.
with you.
Merci, Monsieur Bernier. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Continuing with our theme of polarization, human rights, and immigration, we have people watching this debate right across the country, including a big crowd at the Student Union building at the University of British Columbia. And our next question comes from Paige McDicken, who joins us from Vancouver. Please go ahead, Paige.
Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening. My name is Paige McDicken, and I'm here tonight at UBC, but I live in Coldstream, British Columbia. My question is along the lines of polarization, and to me, Canada feels more divided than ever before. If diversity is our strength, but division is weakness, how will your leadership seek to provide a unified vision for Canada? And how will you ensure that all voices across the political spectrum are heard and considered? Thank you.
Mr. Singh, you may begin. You have 40 seconds.
Sure. Paige, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate getting a chance to chat with you, and thanks for tuning in. When you talk about the divisions that we have in our country, there are a lot of divisions, and they're growing. And I point to a lot of reasons for it. There's radicalization, there's hateful discourse, there's a climate which allows people to be emboldened. But the other reason why people are being exploited into hating one another is because they're worried about the future. There's a lot of people that can't get the basic things that they need, like housing, like the healthcare they need. And it's really the neglect of federal governments that have brought us to this position. And I think the way we tackle a lot of the polarization is making sure people get the basic things they need, like housing, healthcare,
Thank you very much, Mr.
and a good
Singh.
job.
Mr. Scheer, your turn.
Well, it's very important that we understand why Canada is a country of such diversity. And it is because people come from all over the world to take refuge here, to build a better life here. It is because of our freedom. That is the common ground that everyone who has come here, no matter what generation, no matter from what part of the world, can agree on. And it's important that we remember that, promote that, and ensure that people who come here embrace that aspect that makes our country so great. But what is very dangerous is when you have a Prime Minister like Justin Trudeau, who uses legitimate issues like racism and hateful language to demonize anyone who disagrees with him, calling people un-Canadian for disagreeing with his failure on the border.
Thank you very
does
much,
more
Mr.
to create
Scheer.
division.
I'm sorry. Ms. May, your turn.
Thanks, Paige, and hey to UBC. Thank you. I raise my hands to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. We need the kind of leadership that lifts people up, that doesn't make people feel as if politics is rather disgusting and they'd rather not look at it. We have to restore the idea of real democracy, where every citizen has agency and power to work together. Mission Possible for climate action, we call all hands on deck. We're going to need everybody. And to have the kind of democracy that really reflects everyone, we need fair voting. We need to get rid of first past the post, because it creates each political party as rival warring camps, even when the elections are over. We need to get to a healthier democracy.
Ms. May. Mr. Blanchet.
Yes, I believe that democracy grows on information. So, translating votez pour des gens qui vous ressemblent by vote for people who look like you is, at best, dishonest. And may I remind you that in 2011, the exact same phrase was said by Michael Ignatieff, and that in 2015, the exact same sentences were said by Thomas Mulcair. So people may
Thank you very
recognize
much,
themselves.
Mr. Blanchet. I'm
into
sorry,
a
you're
party.
out of time. Mr. Trudeau. It's 40 seconds for each leader.
Oh, it said 45 on my...
I'm
sorry.
It has moved on to 40, sorry. Everybody has the same time? It's Mr. Trudeau's time? Thank you.
Thank you, Paige, for your question. It's great to see everyone at UBC, one of my alma maters. It's really important to recognize that, yes, we're in a time of polarization and differences that get highlighted by the kind of debate going on at this stage and in this campaign about how we're moving forward. But the reality is Canadians agree on most things. We want to raise our kids in a world that is getting better for them. We want to be able to pay for their futures. We want to be able to retire in comfort. We want to create opportunities for our neighbors as well. This is something that binds Canadians together right around the country. And the fact that there is a politics of fear and division that is continuing to dominate here underlies what we're actually doing together as a country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trudeau. Monsieur Bernier.
Speaking about immigration, it is not polarization. Actually, Canada receives more immigrants per capita than any other Western countries, 3 times higher than the US. So we must have a discussion about that. It is the equivalent of 1 Nova Scotia every 3 years, like the population of Nova Scotia every 3 years here in Canada. So, you know, they're all for mass immigration. I'm for a sustainable immigration, and that's why we must have fewer immigrants, a maximum of 150,000 a year, with more economic immigrants for our country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernier. We are moving on to a one-on-one format, followed by an open debate. We start with Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. You may pick any leader of your choice and ask any question of your choosing. You have 30 seconds.
Mr. Trudeau, you broke ethics laws twice. You interfered in an ongoing criminal court proceeding. You shut down parliamentary investigations into your corruption, and you fired the only two people in your caucus who were speaking out against what you were trying to do just for telling the truth. Tell me, when did you decide that the rules don't apply to you?
Mr. Scheer, the role of a Prime Minister is to stand up for Canadians' jobs, to stand up for the public interest, and that's what I've done, and that's what I will continue to do every single day. The way I have worked for Canadians is around investing in them, unlike the vision that you're putting forward of giving tax breaks that help people who are making $400,000 a year, $400,000 a year, more than someone making $40,000 a year. You're offering a $50,000 tax break, which is more money than most Canadians earn, to the wealthiest Canadians with your plan. Of course, we don't entirely know your plan because you haven't released your costed platform yet, which I think is a disrespect to every Canadian
Where's your
watching
costed
tonight.
platform?
Our costed platform
Half
came
of
out
it
2
isn't
weeks
Mr.
ago.
Scheer, you will have a chance to rebut.
Our platform came out weeks ago, and it is worked with we worked with the parliamentary budget officer, and we have a vision, but it is a different vision than yours because we're choosing to invest in people. You're choosing, just like Doug Ford did, to hide your platform from Canadians and deliver cuts to services and cuts to taxes for the wealthiest.
Mr. Scheer
That's not the way to grow the economy.
Rebut, and anybody is free to join in.
You know you're making things up again. Half of your platform isn't even costed. You're making announcements without any details and without any numbers. And you aren't telling Canadians how you're going to pay for it.
You're the one who is hiding your
that
platform
taxes
from
will
Canadians.
go up under your government if you are re-elected.
We lowered
and you
taxes
talk about,
for the middle
we
class
started off talking
and
about
raised
your
them on the
corruption
wealthiest 1%,
and your scandal.
and you voted against
looked
that.
Canadians in the eye and you said that the allegations in the Globe and Mail were false. You said Jody Wilson-Raybould never came to you. You said you never put pressure on her. We now know that those were all lies. You have failed to tell the truth on this corruption scandal.
The responsibility of any Prime Minister is to stand up for jobs, and what you're saying is you wouldn't have done it.
The CEO of SNC-Lavalin said he never threatened jobs or moving the headquarters. You are making that up again.
What we have here is Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Scheer arguing about who's worse for Canada. Really, we got to start arguing. We got to start presenting who's going to be best for Canada. And when we think about what Canadians are going through, Mr. Scheer, your small tax cuts are not going to help a family that's struggling with the cost of childcare, which costs thousands of dollars a month. Your small tax cuts aren't going to help out a family that's struggling with the cost of medication that can cost hundreds of dollars a month.
Canadians are struggling to get by, and we're going to put more money in their pocket.
To make sure
$850 with the universal tax
finish
cut.
my point here. We're going to save families money by investing in Pharmacare for All, which is going to save families over $500 a month. We're going to invest in childcare. We're going to invest in childcare. Let me finish my point here. We're going to invest in childcare, which is going to save families thousands of dollars a month. And we're going to make sure that those families that earn less than $70,000 get dental care. That's going to save families at least $1,240 a month.
Our tax
Where will you find the money? Where will you find the money?
This is a conservative spin. Where we're going to find the money is this. Yeah. We're going to ask the wealthiest Canadians, those who have wealth of over $20 million, those who have fortunes of over $20 million, we're going to ask them to pay a little bit more. Yes, we think they should. That's only going to apply to a small number of families.
You know
we're going to make sure they do
fascinating
it.
about that proposal, because we have the same proposal in our budget. When the Parliamentary Budget Office reviews them, guess what they find is the single biggest uncertainty when we go for revenues from the wealthiest? They're worried that they'll hire lawyers and avoid paying that tax. If you go look at the Parliamentary Budget Office reviews, people said, oh, well, the Green Party is proposing to spend a lot of money. Yes, on pharmacare. Yes, on childcare. Abolishing tuition. And the weakness, they say, in our revenue sources is that wealthy Canadians will continue to hire lawyers and evade their taxes. I think that's shocking. And I think we need to say to people, this is, and if you have wealth, you have obligation, you have responsibility. Pay your taxes.
Yes, for sure.
I seem to remember...
Everyone's got to contribute their fair share. Makes sense.
I seem to remember that Mr. Scheer referred to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And I want to speak for 3,400 innocent people that did nothing wrong. When Mr. Trudeau tried to find a solution, he did it the wrong way, and he admitted it. What you are doing, Mr. Scheer, is playing this old card. You're trading the idea that Quebec is corrupt.
No, that is
Those
not true.
3,400 people have done nothing wrong. Now the value of the shares are going down. The employees are leaving. The clients are leaving.
Mr. Blanchet, with all due respect,
losing it all
with all due
because
respect,
of you.
there is never an excuse for a prime minister to interfere in an independent court
but I was
case.
talking
We
to
do
you, by
not
the way.
want to live in a country where someone can abuse the power of their office to reward their friends and punish their enemies.
And
It
those
is
people have to pay
essential
the
that
price
we
for that.
preserve the
Innocent people pay the
independence-
price for that.
independence
I
of our
just want
judicial
to
system,
add,
and
I
that
just
has
want
been
to add,
extremely
Andrew, that I
damaged by
was the only
Trudeau's
leader who said
actions.
no corporation is above the law. I was the only one who said that.
That's not true.
I think I said that too, Max.
Yeah, it
It
is.
may be the only thing on which we agree, that no corporation is above the law, and
Good.
we need an inquiry into what went
It's a
on
nice beginning.
on the SNC
What a wonderful
ethics scandal.
show of unanimity on this wonderful topic. And that wraps up this topic and this segment. Thank you very much.
I'm Susan Delacourt from the Toronto Star. Welcome, leaders. I'm moderator for the next theme, which will be Indigenous issues. We're going to begin this segment, which was also chosen by random draw, with my question to Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. So here it is. Mr. Scheer, you've said that a Conservative government would focus on practical things in its relationship with Canada's Indigenous people. As you pursue your promised energy corridor, practically speaking, how will you consult, accommodate, and obtain consent from Indigenous peoples? And what will you do when your plans come into conflict with Indigenous rights and interests?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And as someone who has 12 First Nations reserves in his riding, I understand the importance of balancing treaty rights and also the ability for Indigenous Canadians to participate in the economy. And that really is the key. And what I have said is that a Conservative government will ensure that the proposal for the National Energy Corridor takes into account Indigenous concerns by ensuring that a cabinet minister is responsible specifically for Indigenous consultations. And unlike the court ruling that found that the current government mishandled the consultations under the TMX pipeline, we will ensure that it is dynamic, that it is more than just ticking a box and listening to concerns. It's actually addressing those concerns. But we have to remember that we have to get to a place in this country where big things can get built again. And duty to consult means that concerns are heard and addressed, but that also that we find a path to letting things get built in this country.
Ms. May, you have...
Thank you. I am appalled by the fact that Mr. Scheer has forgotten that there was a duty to consult on the Harper government as well, and that they also violated in the findings of the court identical to Trans Mountain on the case of Enbridge. It's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples needs to come into force of law in this country. I know you oppose it because of the debate we had at Maclean's. But the reality of it is Section 35 of the Constitution already requires consultation, and it does not boil down to we will consult with Indigenous people until we get them to agree with us.
No, but it also means that we have
respect,
to find a way to get
nation
to
of
a yes.
Indigenous territorial rights that are inherent.
So what does free, prior, and informed consent mean for every single Indigenous community?
It means
what about the dozens and dozens of Indigenous
consent.
communities who want these projects to go ahead?
Why are you prepared to set aside the decision of the Human Rights Tribunal to fight it in court, just as Mr. Trudeau is, when they actually found, as a matter of fact, that our government committed acts that were reckless and willful in the violation of the rights of Indigenous children?
There are dozens of Indigenous communities who want these projects to go ahead because they know that is the key to prosperity on their reserve. They know that is the way for them, for their young people to get jobs.
Territorial rights are inherently
local. Cannot define what free, prior, and informed consent is.
I don't want to argue over
Thank you.
I'll let you talk. But
Mr. Blanchet, it is now your turn.
Yes, you say, Mr. Scheer, that you want to respect provinces and Quebec jurisdiction, sorry. But when it comes to this pipeline of yours and this, corridor énergétique, which translation, I'm sorry, in English is pipeline, you don't fear the idea of expropriating territories belonging to provinces and saying, the Constitution, yours, not mine, the Constitution says that I have the right to go through provinces through Quebec without their approval. And may I remind you that Quebecers and the Prime Minister of Quebec said clearly that he does not want it.
So that's completely false. What we're talking about here is addressing the environmental concerns and the Indigenous concerns up front, getting that out of the way so that there can be a geographic space where big projects can get built again, including Quebec sharing its hydroelectrical energy.
Now it belongs to Quebec, and then it will not belong to Quebec.
We're talking about the regulatory environment around it. And you know as well as I do that Quebecers purchase a huge percentage of their energy from the United States. I've made my choice. I believe Quebecers should get energy de chez nous, not buying energy, not buying oil from the United States. I've made my choice, Mr. Blanchet.
You have done, and Quebec will make his.
Mr. Bernier, I remind you that this is about how will we respect Indigenous rights. Mr. Trudeau, sorry.
Thank you. We all remember 10 years of Stephen Harper, who did not respect Indigenous rights, did not respect Indigenous peoples. And Mr. Scheer, you're putting forward exactly the same plan that didn't just fail Indigenous peoples, didn't just fail Indigenous communities and their kids, but they also failed to get important energy projects built. We need to keep moving forward in a way that respects Indigenous peoples, respects that there's going to be a range of views, but is grounded in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that you have consistently blocked through your party's actions. That is not respect for Indigenous peoples. Perry Bellegarde, the Grand Chief of the head of the Assembly of First Nations, has said that no government has done more for Indigenous peoples than this government, and he's one of your constituents, Mr. Scheer.
That's right. He comes from Little Blackbear in my
riding. He'd love to talk to you.
He's got my phone number.
Give you a phone call sometimes.
I have nothing to learn from Mr. Trudeau, who fired the first Indigenous Attorney General for doing her job. She said that she would do politics differently, and you fired her when she did. And you want to talk about getting pipelines built? You've canceled 2 pipelines, and the one you bought, you can't build. You've let tens of thousands of people in Alberta and Saskatchewan down, and you have failed to recognize that Indigenous communities are hurt by this as well.
I am accepting the fact that I'm going to be attacked for not building pipelines from some and for building pipelines for others.
Not getting anything
and the
done.
balance we need to take
I think we'll be talking about this more.
You're doing nothing.
Mr. Bernier.
Mr. Scheer, you said that you're ready for building pipelines all across this country by the private sector. But at the same time, you said, Quebecers are ready to buy oil and gas from Canada. I agree with that. I agree that Quebecers know that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines than by trains. But at the same time, the Quebec government said that there's no social acceptability for a pipeline in Quebec. What will be your position on that? Do you think that you'll be able to use the Constitution? Because after consultation, if we don't have any agreement, we must be able to use the Constitution, Section 9210, to be able to build a pipeline. When you do that, the federal government will have the full authority, the full jurisdiction to approve pipeline. But what you're saying, you're for pipelines, but you don't have the courage to use the Constitution to be sure that we'll have pipelines in this country for the unity of our country and the prosperity of our country.
That's just not the case at all. I've always said that the federal government must stand up for federal jurisdiction. We respect provincial jurisdiction. And when you've got the best idea, I am convinced that I can get support for this project because
you don't have the
Quebecers
support in Quebec.
Canadian
you don't have the support
energy.
in BC.
Quebecers know that it's better to take energy from Western Canada than the tanker after tanker of foreign oil coming up the St. Lawrence or oil and gas coming from Donald Trump's economy. I know Quebecers will support this project because it will also allow them to share their hydroelectrical power with other provinces as well.
Mr. Singh.
I want to talk about a recent decision. The Human Rights Tribunal of Canada found that the Harper government and Mr. Trudeau's government willfully and recklessly discriminated against Indigenous kids. These are kids that weren't getting equal funding.
Yep.
And then there was a landmark decision that said these kids should get equal funding, and it was received as finally some justice for those kids. And then Mr. Trudeau is now, and his government are going to appeal that decision. He wanted to fight hard to keep SNC-Lavalin out of the courts, but he's going to drag Indigenous kids to court. That is wrong. How could someone do that? How could someone do that?
This decision will have massive, huge ramifications for several aspects of the way the federal government provides services to Indigenous Canadians. It also is a very large, significant settlement amount, and I believe that when you're dealing with these types of important public policy issues, that it is legitimate to say that it should be reviewed have a judicial review.
I disagree, of course, but I want to talk about one other issue. You know, we're talking about Indigenous issues. You know, I went to Grassy Narrows again just recently. We've got a community impacted by mercury poisoning, and Indigenous activists went to a private fundraiser where Mr. Trudeau mocked that Indigenous activist, saying thank you for your donation to someone living with mercury poisoning.
Because he's a fraud.
What kind of prime minister does that?
I wish I had that answer, but one that doesn't deserve to be reelected.
That's time for this section of the debate. The open debate is over, but we continue on our theme of Indigenous affairs. We have a question from an audience member here in Gatineau, Natasha Beatty. Go ahead, Natasha.
Good evening. As a member of Beausoleil First Nation, my question is this. If elected, how would your parties work with provinces and territories on recognizing and affirming Indigenous rights, specifically noting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, and the calls for justice in the recent missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry? Miigwech.
The leaders will all have a chance to answer this question. Thank you, Natasha. Starting with Mr. Scheer.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Of course, there's a lot there for just 40 seconds. There are many areas in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women report that Conservatives have been calling for quite a while, including combating human trafficking, something that is very important. Also, we support preserving Indigenous languages by ensuring that the federal government does what it can to prevent some of the languages that are at risk of being lost to preserve them. When we're talking about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we need to remember that when you talk about free, prior, and informed consent, that leaves a great deal of uncertainty about what that means. And there are large numbers of Indigenous communities who want these energy projects to succeed, and we need certainty and clarity around that.
All right, we will now go to Ms. May.
Natasha Miigwech. It's an extremely important question, and Greens across the country are united in this. We will honor the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It must be brought into law in this country, and our existing web of laws and regulations, which were properly described by the Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women as constituting structural violence, must be reviewed and brought up to the standard of the United Nations Declaration. We must bring in the recommendations of the Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's not a short-term project. It is on us as settler Canadians to bring justice.
Mr. Blanchet.
Yes, we also support the Declaration of the United Nations on the Rights of Indigenous People. I do believe, and I've spent the most beautiful moments of this campaign with people from the First Nations. They are nations, as well as Canada is a nation and Quebec is a nation. And a nation does not put its culture, its language, its heritage in the hands of another nation. So what they ask for, and they have to ask because we are not, we are no better than they are to represent themselves, is that all those reports and inquiries and declarations bring something real and respectful for them.
Mr. Trudeau.
Thank you, Natasha, for your question. We have moved forward on reconciliation in ways that no previous government has been able to, but I am the first to recognize there's much more to do. We lifted 87 long-term boil water advisories, and we are on track to lifting the 50 more, but we're continuing to invest in communities. On the issue of child and family services, we recognize the tribunal's ruling that says that children need to be compensated, and we will be compensating them. But we've also moved forward to end the tragedies by moving forward on legislation that keeps kids in care in their communities with their language, with their culture. We also want to move forward with Grassy Narrows with the community on a treatment centre, and money is not the objection to investing in what they need in that treatment centre.
Thank you, Ms. Bernier.
No other leader is ready to build a new relationship with our First Nation. They all support the status quo. But the system is broken. We still have extreme poverty on reserve. We need a bold reform. and we are the only party that will try to implement property rights on reserve and also establish a new relationship based on self-reliance for these communities. We need to build a new system, working with them, but that's not what they want, because we cannot fix the system right now if we don't do a bold reform, and we are ready for that.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you so much for your question. Really, it's a matter of respect and dignity. All of the issues that you've raised come down to that basic question of respect and dignity. And one of the first things we would do, we wouldn't take Indigenous kids to court and challenge a decision that says they were willfully and recklessly discriminated against. We wouldn't do that. We would immediately address issues of justice. That means implementing all the recommendations from the reports that are so powerful and have a guideline towards solving the problems. We'd make sure there's clean drinking water. I don't accept any excuses why we can't in 2019. We'd make sure that we implement clean housing, good quality housing, and education and welfare services. We can do these things.
Thank you. So now we have time for another leader-to-leader debate on any topic. Leading this one off will be Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Elizabeth May, you have, I believe, 1 minute.
Thank you, Susan. And my question is to Justin Trudeau. Picking up from this very fractured discussion on Indigenous issues, but let's face it, right now, Indigenous peoples, the Assembly of First Nations, are telling us their #1 concern is the climate emergency. And we need to focus on real solutions. It's not good enough to have better rhetoric than Mr. Scheer. And with all respect to Mr. Singh, it's not about rhetoric. It's about a target that's grounded in science. And to do that, we need 60% reductions by 2030. Not Mr. Singh's 38, not your 30. Will you, Mr. Trudeau, join with all of us in an inner cabinet that gets rid of the partisanship and says, after this election, we move to protect our children's future together?
Mr. Trudeau, your answer.
We recognize that targets are important, and we're going to be surpassing the targets we inherited. But targets are not a plan. We have a real plan that has delivered over the past 4 years by on our way to banning single-use plastics, on putting a price on pollution right across the country in a way that returns money to Canadians, that actually makes, unlike what Mr. Scheer is saying, most Canadians better off, 80% of Canadians better off with a price on pollution than they will be when he rips up our climate change if he were to form government after this election. We will continue to do the things that need to be done and bring Canadians along with it. Our plan is realistic and ambitious and doable, and that is what Canadians need, because the danger of not acting on the environment is tremendous. The danger of not having a plan for our future, either the environment or the economy, is going to be borne by our kids.
Ms. May, you may now begin open debate. There is 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
The science is clear. Your target is a commitment to failure. That's why it's so doable and achievable, because it doesn't do what the IPCC says we must do. We must go off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And you bought a pipeline. You can't be a climate leader and spend $10 to $13 billion more on a project that by itself blows through our carbon budget. We have to actually
a slogan is not a plan.
No, we have a plan.
A slogan is not a plan. It is an unrealizable plan. Canadians need that action that is going to actually make us better, fight climate change, protect the environment, and build a stronger economy for our kids. That's what we have done more over the past 4 years than any government in the history of Canada, and there is much more to do. There is much more to do.
No one remembers Paul Martin's plan in 2005. It was better. But the reality is, if you have
over the past 4 years, we delivered on it.
If you have a fire in a 4-story building, getting a 1-story ladder doesn't do it.
That is completely false. And just because you say something over and over and over again doesn't make it true. There's no Canadian. There's no Canadian. There's no Canadian that believes that they're going to be better off by paying a carbon tax. You have given a massive exemption to the country's largest polluters, and your plan is already
the experts,
failing.
the parliamentary budget officer points out 80% of Canadians are better off under
He had to trust the numbers you gave him. Nobody
incentive.
believes your numbers, Justin, because you
do
have
not want to act on climate change, Mr. Scheer. You are doing nothing. You are reversing the only plan we ever had.
You promised to balance your budget this year.
Go back. One at a time.
But life is getting more expensive.
Mr. Singh and then Mr. Barry.
I want to say this directly to Canadians. You do not need to choose between Mr. Delay and Mr. Deny. There is another option. There is another option out there. We are committed to a real plan that's going to take on the biggest polluters. It's going to take on the powerful interests, because that's what we need to do if we want to build a better future.
What is your target?
It's going to mean taking on the powerful. That means we're going to have to
You
cut
can
our
take
emissions
on the
by more than
powerful,
half.
But you need to have a
It
plan
absolutely
that
means,
is rooted
it
in a
absolutely
target
means we've got to
that
take it on.
saves our kids' future.
It means we're going to have to
No
reduce
Canadians
our
are
emissions by
taking
more than
advantage
half.
by
I just want to add, I
To do
think
that,
it's
we've got to take
important.
on
It's
the
important right
powerful
now.
at the
People
top.
must
We're
know
prepared
that.
to do that.
People must know that Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau, you're the same on climate change. You want to impose a carbon tax on Canadians, and you want to impose more costly regulation.
I think that's the most offensive thing you've said all night, Max, that we're the same on climate change.
You want to impose also a big tax on the big emitters. So you're the same on climate change, and you won't be able to achieve your targets.
Seconds with Mrs. May, please.
Yeah.
I think you and I have to find some common grounds when we get into that House of Commons.
I don't think it will be on GNL Quebec and the fact that you're supporting a project that blows through more of the carbon budget against the will of many Quebecers and threatens the St. Lawrence River.
This is not what I had in mind, and I've provided answers to that. I think the goal should be down to almost nothing.
Yes.
Not 30, not 60, not almost nothing. And what do you think about this idea of an equalization based on gas emissions? Those who are over the average emissions of Canada pay, and those who are under the average emissions get the money. The incentive is for both parts.
What we have to do is work together, and with all due respect, that was the question I asked Mr. Trudeau. Are any of you prepared to accept the notion of changing status quo decision-making so we form an internal cabinet
My only requirement
based
is
the
on,
principle
based
of
on
that.
My only
fighting the
requirement is that I
existential
would
threat
not
of
work with
climate
conservatives.
change.
That is good.
But I would
Okay,
certainly
that's all
work with
Accusation
others.
does not help.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have. That concludes this round. Thank you very much, and on to the next one.
Hello, I'm Donna Friesen from Global News, and I'm moderating this segment on affordability and income security. Before I begin, I just want to say you've all been very vigorous in your debate. Some of your comments have gone a little long, so we're going to have to trim a bit in terms of time, but we will make sure that we keep those trims fair and equal. So on this topic, Ms. May, I have a question to you. Canadians are carrying $2 trillion of household debt. That means the average Canadian owes about $1.79 for every dollar of income he or she earns per year after taxes. It's never been this high. We are borrowing to live, something my parents told me was a terrible idea. You have made a bold promise to balance the federal budget in 5 years. How do you do that without causing more financial pain for Canadians and putting people further into debt? And what's the single biggest thing in your policies, in your platform, that will reduce household debt?
Thank you for the question, and I'm very pleased that we are the party standing on stage today that has a full platform, has the budget numbers publicly accessible, and approved as a budget that passes muster by Kevin Page and the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy. The way to bring more public service, to bring more help to Canadians, childcare, banning tuition, investing in post-secondary education, pharmacare, dental programs for low-income Canadians, all things that make life more affordable, is not to have cuts, but to go after places where there is revenue, offshore money that's being hidden, a financial transaction tax, going after 1% tax on people who have more than $20 million in wealth, and a series of moves to increase the revenue coming into the Government of Canada. Now, that is all, of course, based on the current economic situation. If we hit a recession, we would not slavishly or ideologically balance the books. But right now, we think we'll have a balanced budget in 5 years.
Mr. Blanchet, your opportunity to debate Ms. May on this topic.
It is really a bad idea to borrow to live. It is a no better idea to cut too strongly into services to people that mainly need it.
Right.
What about the idea of cutting all subsidies to oil, as we propose to do, and with bringing a law on the floor about that? How about this idea we have discussed green equalization, which brings money to the government? How about cutting into those foreign tax shelters, including the 2 new ones created by Mr. Trudeau? And what about taxing and perceiving taxes from those giants on the web that steal the money from our advertising companies?
D'accord. In our platform, we call for taxes on the e-commerce companies, the virtuals, the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebook that mine billions of dollars out of this country and pay virtually no tax. We agree with you. We have to cut all fossil fuel subsidies. As a matter of fact, that was a promise made by Mr. Harper in 2009, by Mr. Trudeau in 2015, but they've increased because we're subsidizing LNG, which I'd like to hear you answer where you are on JNL Quebec. We need to get rid of fossil fuels, and right now, we're still giving public funds.
I was the minister responsible for the back.
I'm going to move you on. I'm sorry. Mr. Trudeau, your chance to debate Ms. May on household debt.
We made a very different decision than Stephen Harper had in the previous 10 years when we decided to invest in Canadians instead. And that decision to invest in the middle class and people working hard to join it lifted 900,000 people out of poverty, including 300,000 kids. We gave more support for students going to school. We made more supports for seniors. And what that has done is actually grown our economy. More than 1 million new jobs created, most of them full-time over the past 4 years, at the same time as we have reduced poverty, exceeding any targets that we had even set forward. We've done that in a way that is responsible. The international credit rating agencies
with 8 seconds
have
left for me.
given
Ms. May,
us a AAA rating.
Let's give the floor to Ms. May.
Yeah, the concern I have about all these debates, by the way, and I'm sure a number of other leaders on stage share it, we don't have any section on health costs or health care in the course of 2 debates. So I want to turn this to the affordability issue and how much more affordable life will be for Canadians with full, universal, single-payer pharmacare. It's in our platform. It's partially in yours. It's in Mr. Singh's.
We've actually taken concrete actions towards that.
Well,
lowering drug prices, lowering prices
for are you prepared to accept Eric Hoskin's recommendation for universal, single-payer health care?
I'm afraid time's up for you. Mr. Bernier, your chance to debate Ms. May on household debt.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at your platform, Elizabeth, and you will spend $60 billion. Spending won't create any wealth. You cannot spend your way to prosperity. We need to have more private sector investment. Yeah. And at the end, you know that our national credit card is full. We still have deficit. And Mr. Trudeau just had $70 billion on our debt, and you'll have another $60 billion on our debt. It is not responsible. Our children will have to pay for that.
But you have your famous private sector having got massive tax cuts when you were in Mr. Harper's cabinet, based on being told these were the job creators and it would be great when they got tax cuts. They have not invested in the economy. They're sitting on piles of cash. Mark Carney calls it the dead money. We need to get that money and do public sector infrastructure investments like a national grid that will bring renewable energy from one part of the country to the other. No pipelines, by the way, but we need an electricity grid that serves the needs of every province and every Canadian.
Yeah, what I like from you, Elizabeth, you don't want any subsidies to the oil and gas industry, and I don't believe in corporate subsidies also in corporate welfare, so we can agree on that.
All right, let's move on to Mr. Singh, your opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. May. I actually really appreciate that you wanted to shift the discussion towards healthcare. I think it's one of the biggest concerns that families have. When we look at Canadians across this country, they can't get the medication they need, they can't get the dental care they need, and they're struggling. I met a woman in my office in Burnaby who was covering up her mouth because she was embarrassed that she had lost her teeth because she couldn't get the care she needed. And that, to me, is heartbreaking in a country as wealthy as ours. And I know, Ms. May, you're prepared to do this, but the problem is Mr. Trudeau does not have the courage to take on the insurance and the pharmaceutical lobbyists that don't want this to happen. I'm going to make it happen. If you vote New Democrats, we're going to make sure we make these things happen because we don't work for the powerful and wealthy. We don't meet with pharmaceutical companies and then listen to them. We work for you. We work for Canadians. We're going to deliver on these things.
We have to have it. I hope you'll agree with me that we need to renegotiate a new health accord. It's been left alone for too long. We need to get back at the table. The constituents in my riding, I just did 8 debates with the local candidates in my riding. By the way, all of you guys can be proud, except for you, Mr. Blanchet. All of you can be proud of the candidates you have running locally because I've been in 8 debates with them in the last week. But one thing we heard from every constituent in every town hall meeting is we are suffering from a lack of family doctors. We need an investment in our health care. The wheels are falling off the bus, and
Mr.
we
Trudeau
need to invest.
Mr. Trudeau has continued the same cuts brought in by the Conservatives.
Mr. Scheer, your opportunity.
Well, the question was about affordability
and household debt.
And household debt. And the entire theme of our platform is leaving more money in the pockets of Canadians so that they can get ahead. It's time for Canadians to have a break. Our universal tax cut will mean $850 in the pocket of a hardworking average income Canadian. We're going to bring back the children's fitness tax credit to make raising children more affordable. We're going to bring back the green public transit tax credit to make taking the bus or the train more affordable as well. We're going to help fight climate change by bringing in the green home renovation tax credit, which will put money in the pockets of Canadians and help lower emissions. And we're going to pay for that.
I'll just finish. It'll cause them to go through the roof.
The way we're going to pay for those is by cutting corporate welfare and reducing Canada's foreign aid budget by 25%. So we're going to stop sending money to the relatively well-off countries. We're going to bring that money back home so that Canadians can get ahead.
Mr. Scheer, that may be the worst idea in your whole non-platform, is the cutting of foreign aid. I wear this little pin. This is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, to which this country is committed. Ending poverty within the next decade, within Canada and globally, is actually possible, but not if we ever had the misfortune of having your short-term, misguided, greedy and selfish policies.
It's not greedy to put money in the pockets of Canadians, Ms. May.
We're
fundamentally disagree with you.
We're going to stop you there.
It destabilizes the world, what you're proposing.
We're going to stop you there so that we can hear from another Canadian, please. On the theme of affordability, one of the many places Canadians are watching tonight is in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Here's the scene at the Copper House restaurant. And earlier we heard a question on affordability from Scott Marsden.
Hi, my name is Scott Marsden from Yellowknife. My question is, what is your government going to do about the growing crisis of income inequality and affordability in Canada?
Ms. May, first to you.
I've been in that restaurant. Hello, Yellowknife. Good to see you again. Look, we must act for income equality. We need to look at the fact that over the years, the gap between the various wealthiest Canadians and the average Canadian is continuing to expand. We're calling for a tax commission. We haven't had a proper tax commission since the 1960s to examine our tax code, to see if it's still progressive, to find out if all these corporate boutique tax cuts that have piled up over one after the other after successive governments is taking money away from those Canadians who need it most and allowing those who really have massive income to continue, as many Auditor Generals have found, to be treated by Canadian Revenue Agency as if they have special status and don't have to pay their taxes.
Ms. May, thank you. Mr. Blanchet.
First, I must say that if saying untrue things at the end of time is your way to do things, collaboration might be done already. However, about the issue, if federal government was to respect jurisdiction of provinces, it would take less time. It would cost less money, and provinces and Quebec could do what they have to do about health care, bring the money that is owed to Quebec and provinces. This is what has to be done. Lodging, the money should be given to provinces and Quebec because it is mostly, if not only, their jurisdiction. That helps people.
Mr. Trudeau, to you. The question is about income inequality and what you would do.
We recognize that we need to help people more directly. That's why the first thing we did was lower taxes for the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. We're moving again forward with a tax break for low and middle income Canadians and nothing for the wealthiest, unlike Mr. Scheer's universal tax credit. We're also moving forward by increasing the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted hundreds of thousands of families out of poverty by 15% for kids under 1. We're increasing the old age security for seniors over 75. We're making sure that students have an easier time paying back their student debts by not having to pay back until they're making $35,000 a year. We're investing in Canadians.
Mr. Trudeau, thank you. Mr. Bernier, your turn.
First of all, I think it is important to be able to have a discussion about what is important for Canadians. We are the only party that will balance the budget in 2 years. All the other parties on the stage will spend and spend and spend. That is not a solution. The credit card is full, but we will do that without cutting services. We will cut corporate welfare, all the corporate welfare, $5 billion that we can save there. All these political parties, the only promise that they do everything to get your vote. I promise you to do nothing except balancing the budget, and after that, lower your taxes. That's the only responsible policy.
Mr. Bernier, thanks. Mr. Singh, to you.
I want to thank Scott for the question. Income inequality is massive. There's also massive wealth inequality. And these are not just esoteric academic discussions. When those at the very top do not pay their fair share, when 87 families in Canada have the combined wealth of 3 provinces, it hurts families. It means we don't have the funds to invest in healthcare. It means we don't have the money to invest in things like dental care. So while Mr. Trudeau likes to talk a nice game, and I admit he says nice words, but what he's done is he's given $14 billion to the richest corporations to buy private jets and limousines in the last fall economic statement. We would instead invest in people, ask the super wealthy to pay their fair share, and invest in programs to relieve the costs on families.
Mr. Singh, thank you. Mr. Scheer, your turn on income inequality.
Well, actually, Mr. Trudeau has his facts wrong again. Our universal tax cut drastically is much better for middle-income Canadians than his proposal. And he thinks that someone earning $47,000 a year is somehow too rich for a tax cut. I disagree. We also recognize that you don't need to tear some people down to lift others up. Justin Trudeau's attack on small businesses, threatening them, making it harder for them to grow and expand and offer the types of opportunities that lead to the jobs that have much higher income earnings, was precisely part of the problem over the last 4 years, all the while protecting people who have inherited trust funds. We will take a different approach. We will ensure that our entrepreneurs have the support they need to grow and succeed.
Mr. Scheer, thank you. We're going to move on now. I have a question for the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, after which each one of the leaders will have a chance to debate him one-on-one. Mr. Blanchet, Quebec is one of 5 provinces to receive federal equalization payments in 2019. It received $13.1 billion, the highest amount of any province. That's a benefit of being part of a federal system where wealth is shared. You've referred to the money as an assistance check. Premier Legault has said he wants to wean Quebec off equalization payments. Do you agree with that? And if so, how would that make life more affordable for Canadians?
Thank you for the question. First, the very system called equalization is based on some flawed reasonings, flawed ways to analyze things. And this is why we propose something else that would progressively replace it. Oil provinces are very wealthy and have developed those resources with money from all across Canada, including Quebec. And today, they are using it as a threat over Quebec, which citizens do not want to be a passage for this oil through their territory because they rely on clean energy and believe this is the only responsible way to do things. We propose a kind of equalization that would be based without any constitution change on how provinces perform in fighting climate change. Those who are over the average pay, those who are under the average receive the money, giving a strong encouragement for everybody to reduce GHG emissions.
Mr. Blanchet, thank you. Let's go. The leaders will all have a chance to debate this one-on-one, 1 minute each, beginning with you, Mr. Trudeau.
Thank you, Donna. Equalization exists so that every Canadian across the country, regardless of the province they're born into or live in, accesses the same quality of service right across the country. It is not a perfect system, but it is a system that ensures, as much as we can, equality of opportunity across Canada. We've continued to engage with provinces across the country on updating the equalization formula in ways that are fair, and it is something that continues to bind this country together. Unfortunately, Mr. Blanchet, as a sovereigntist, are always looking for opportunities to create fights between Quebec and the rest of Canada to advance your separatist agenda.
We have paid for the development of oil in Western Canada, and you make us pay again with this idea of buying a pipeline over there. And tell me something, what can a Canadian do that a Quebecer cannot do? Why would we need anything?
I think by definition, a Quebecer can do anything a Canadian can do because a Quebecer is a Canadian and will remain a Canadian under my watch. Mr. Blanchet.
Gentlemen, thank you. Mr. Bernier, you now have the opportunity to debate Mr. Blanchet.
Yes, speaking about the equalization, I'm the only leader who's ready to look at the equalization formula for being sure that the formula will be less generous and fair for every province. Let me explain. It is not fair to tax people out west and also in Quebec because Quebecers are proud and they want to live in a richer province. So what we must do, we must give the right incentive to provinces to develop their own natural resources. That's so important to have a discussion about the equalization, and they don't want to have that discussion. Let's be less generous and fair for every province. Why? Why? Because it is important when you have people in Alberta. 20% of people in Alberta wants to have the discussion, and let's have that discussion.
Okay, Quebecers receive less money from equalization per capita than anybody else who receives it in Canada. Do you mind about stopping those lies?
All right. Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Singh, your opportunity to debate.
Yes. I was thinking about ways we can make life more affordable. And this is where I think we can do a lot if we work together. This is one of the things I believe that we can build a better Canada if we tackle some of the challenges that people are facing. One of the things that we hear about a lot in Quebec is the cost of healthcare, and that it's not there for them when they need it. If we work together, the Universal Pharmacare Plan is one where we use the buying power of all Canadians. It's still delivered provincially, but we can actually buy medication for lower costs, and it will help out Quebec and help out people.
It is delivered provincially, and dental care would be, if we wanted to finance it, a provincial jurisdiction. You have good ideas, but your ideas always interfere and infringe into jurisdictions which are those of provinces and Quebec. So if you want to do that, please do it for Canada. Take our part of the money as the Constitution allows.
We can do that,
and
we can work together. The other thing we need to do is, when we want to tackle the problems, is housing. Housing is something that's concerning a lot of people. Federal money used to be invested in building, in partnership with provinces to build housing. We want to do that again.
Mr. Scheer, thank you. Mr. Singh, pardon me. Mr. Scheer, over to you.
I don't know how people are getting me mixed up.
You not allow that.
I wore a bright orange turban on purpose today.
Mr.
What does it take?
I'm slightly taller than you, Mr. Singh. That must be.
And stop rubbing that in.
Mr. Scheer, please continue the debate.
It's important for Quebecers to realize that on so many issues, Monsieur Blanchet agrees with Justin Trudeau. He will support Justin Trudeau's higher taxes. He will support massive deficits that will continue to put pressure on Canadian taxpayers, meaning more and more of their dollar goes to pay the interest on the debt.
I just idea to raise more money without raising taxes.
Blanchet,
so you didn't listen or you didn't understand?
We know that Monsieur Blanchet's priority is working with the Parti Québécois on sovereignty. So we know that if votes for Bloc Québécois MPs mean that Justin Trudeau stays Prime Minister. Avec le Bloc, le plus ça change, le plus ça reste le même.
And you know what? Do you remember that all that you say you did for Quebecers was done when Harper was in the minority government?
His
and
oil
all
and
those
gas
changes were
from the United
forced by
States.
Bloc
You
Québécois.
prefer sending consumers' dollars to the United States to support that economy. I prefer Canadian energy.
You've talked over each other and you're both out of time. Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Ms. May, it's your turn.
Forgive me, Donna, but Yellowknife, Ryland, I see you. Congratulations for being elected MLA. I'm just so excited. Now, turning to equalization payments, we need equalization in Canada because we're a country, we're a family. We need to think like a family. Your proposal, Mr. Blanchet, would be to put an extra burden on those parts of Canada, like Alberta, that have the toughest challenge to meet the climate crisis. We're concerned as Greens that we work together, that we not alienate Alberta.
I had noticed that you had a strong sensibility for Alberta since your previous positions on oil were quite nice to them.
No, they're not. We're shutting down the oil sands by 2030. They don't find it nice. That's why they deserve fairness.
In a family, sometimes one does not agree with others, and it doesn't have to be forced to do what others say.
We are facing a climate emergency, and anyone who understands the science, and I hope you do,
and this is a world issue, and only countries do international affairs. Provinces don't.
We have to pull our weight as provinces and as nations, and we do it together.
We have to move along. Thank you for that. We will end this segment with another open debate. Yves-François Blanchet, it is your turn to ask any other leader a question on the topic of your choice.
I wondered a long time. Mr. Scheer, you said in English a few months ago that you were strongly against the very idea of Bill 21 about laicity of the state in Quebec. Then you said in French in Quebec that you would do nothing against that law. But your very close collaborator, Mr. Alain Reyes, said the day before yesterday that you would protect the Bill 21. He said that in French, I must admit. You were the only one that would protect the Bill 21.
Can you get to the question, please?
How will you do that?
It's very, the answer to this question is very simple, Monsieur Blanchet, and you know that I've always been very clear on this issue. We will not intervene in the court case that is currently before the courts. The elected officials of Quebec have taken this decision, and now it is before the courts, and the courts,
said that you would protect the law, not tolerate the law, protect the law.
What will you do to
protect this law?
And in French. It's very important that a federal government respects and protects individual liberties and individual human rights. We will not pursue this court of action at a federal level.
Your definition
but
of
Mr. Scheer has the floor.
In the law.
It's quite simple. I just answered that question, Mr.
Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Scheer has the floor.
Monsieur Blanchet. It's the same thing in French. We will not intervene in this court case. The court case will decide this.
Does not say the same thing as you do.
It's exactly the same position, Monsieur Blanchet. You're trying to create a division, a confusion where it doesn't exist.
Does not mean that you would protect it. I would protect it. You would
so
not.
we are open. We are going to have an open debate. That was Mr. Scheer's time to answer. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I will leave you some.
We will now have the open debate. Mr. Blanchet, you may begin.
Okay.
Can I start speaking now because you spoke during my answer?
Please go ahead. We're still nice people.
The issue on this has been exactly the same from the beginning. And Monsieur Blanchet, I think you're trying to create confusion where there doesn't exist confusion. I have always been very clear, both in English and in French. The answers have always been the same. This is something that at the federal level we will not pursue. The Conservative Party has always stood for individual liberty, for fundamental human rights. It was a Conservative Prime Minister that brought forward the Bill of Rights, the last Prime Minister from Saskatchewan,
Except,
John
of course,
Diefenbaker.
Mr. Scheer,
and
you won't defend a woman's right to choose. You've dismissed LGBT protections.
False.
You haven't apologized for your words against LGBT Canadians years ago. Will you recognize and apologize for that?
Millions of Canadians have a different position on this issue. And like millions of Canadians, I am personally pro-life. And it is okay in this country to have a difference of opinion, something you do not recognize.
But Canadians need to know that their Prime Minister, Canadians need to know that their Prime Minister...
One at a time, please. One at a time, please.
The laws and access on this issue have not changed for 30 years under Liberal Prime Ministers, under Conservative Prime Ministers.
Mr. Scheer, let me help you out here. Canadians need to know that their Prime Minister will be there to defend them. And you have been not unequivocal on defending women's rights. You're signing the nomination papers of people who want to take away
How about your
the rights
misogynist, racist candidate in Nova Scotia?
Okay.
Nobody can hear what you're saying anymore.
You will be signing the nomination papers for people who have pledged to take away rights from women.
I know. You're having a mini debate over here. Can we bring in
a man has
Mr.
no position in a discussion on a woman's right to choose.
How about
Let's be very clear on that.
In a debate.
Very clear.
It's been really interesting for most of this campaign to hear a lot of men arguing about what a woman's rights should be, but having all of you, except for Max, participated in the TVA debate where you were perfectly happy to keep women off the stage. I'm the only woman leader of a party. You participated in a debate which did not let our little girls see that there's a chance for a woman in this country to be Prime Minister, to run as the leader of a party. We must be clear as all leaders, and you are not clear, Andrew, that we will never allow a single inch of retreat from the hard-earned rights of women in this country, not 1 inch.
This is... But it troubles me that you're open to working with Mr. Scheer.
Sure.
And your own MPs could come up with a law against abortion, and you said that you will tolerate it.
I said we don't allow anyone to run in our party who doesn't hold a pro-choice
When they
position.
are in danger of losing an election, they bring forward
This clearly needs more time. I'm afraid we don't have more time.
Unlike all the rest of you.
Ms. May, thank you very much. We're going to have to move on. Thank you. That concludes our segment.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Barton from CBC News. Our next theme, we've already talked about it a little bit, but now we will for real, the environment and energy. And we will start with a question from another Canadian. We're going to go to a gathering of people watching the debate, this time at the Halifax Central Library. And we will talk to Britton Bancroft of Minto, New Brunswick, is there and has this question. Over to you.
Hi, my name is Britt Bancroft, and I'm from Minto, New Brunswick. And I believe we live in an age of climate crisis. And this is the last election we have before a point of no return is reached. Furthermore, I believe that for many large corporations that pollute, the current system of fines and penalties associated with that polluting is just the cost of doing business. What concrete plans does each leader have to address big business polluting?
Thank you, Britt. And the first answer goes to
That
Mr.
is
Blanchet.
very interesting. What is considered as the most progressive system to fight climate change so far is this agreement between California and Quebec, this trade exchange system that forces businesses to lower their emission through time. And it works very well. And I had the privilege of completing the negotiation of such a system and signing it. And it should be used elsewhere. Simple taxes that return into the pockets of people without any change in incentive are not the solution. Doing nothing, hoping that, you know, some spirit will come and solve the problem is no solution either.
That's it, Mr. Blanchet. Mr. Trudeau, over to you.
As Mr. Blanchet said, Quebec and other provinces like BC have moved forward with putting a price on pollution. We've ensured that that price is put in right across the country because it is a mechanism that will both lower emissions and ensure that Canadians can afford this transition. The choice tonight is very clear between two parties that have very different views on climate change. Mr. Scheer wants to rip up the only serious plan on climate change Canada has ever had the day after the election, and we will continue to do more. We recognize we need to do more to fight climate change. That's why we're going to be surpassing our targets. That's why we're going to get to net zero by 2050.
Mr. Bernier.
At the People's Party, we are the only real environmentalist party. Why? First of all, we want to do things that are possible. We want to do things that are possible to protect our health, our air, our environment, our water. All the other leaders claim to save the world and to save the climate. They cannot. Canada represents only 1.6% of the green gas emissions. And they claim also to be able to achieve the Paris Accord target. They cannot. They have to impose a carbon tax of $300 a ton to do that, and they won't do it. They don't do it. They're hypocrites. We won't have a tax on carbon.
Time's up. Time's up. Mr. Singh.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Britt, for your question. We are faced with a climate crisis. There's no question about it. We've got massive forest fires, which make it hard to breathe in some parts of Canada, in the west. We've got massive flooding, which means people are losing their homes in the east. This is a serious crisis. Now, while Mr. Trudeau has said a lot of nice things, let's look at what he's done. He said that he's for the environment, but then he continues to exempt the biggest polluters from his price on pollution. He says he wants to fight the climate crisis. And what does he do? He continues to subsidize oil and gas massively. He says he's a climate leader. What does he do? He buys a pipeline. There's a big gap between what Mr. Trudeau says and what he does.
And Mr. Scheer, over to you next, sir.
I find myself agreeing with you again, Mr. Singh. On the environment, like so many issues, Justin Trudeau says one thing and then does something completely different. He's talking about hitting 2050 targets. He can't even meet 2030 targets. He talks about ripping up a real plan. His plan has been proven to fail. He has given a massive exemption to the country's largest polluters. They were able to negotiate themselves up to a 90% exemption from his carbon tax. Meanwhile, hard-working commuters, moms and dads taking their kids to school or driving to work, they have to pay the full brunt of that. Our plan is a real plan that takes the climate change fight global, recognizing that we could shut everything down here
That's it, Mr. Scheer.
tomorrow.
I'm dropping the hammer, coming to the end of the show. Ms. May.
Britt, thank you for the question. You, unlike everyone else on this stage, clearly understand that we're up against a real climate emergency. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has given us hard timelines, challenging targets. If we're going to do what's required, it isn't easy. We don't grade on a curve and say because a plan is less ambitious, it's therefore more doable. If it fails to meet the goal of holding global average temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, we fail to give our kids a livable world. Greta Thunberg is right. The house is on fire. Grown-ups then stand up and say, kids, get to safety. We've got this. We'll take care of this for you.
My turn now to ask a question, and this one goes to Mr. Trudeau. And the question is this, Mr. Trudeau. Last fall, the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change stressed the need to act quickly to limit further global warming. A report from Environment Canada says this country is warming twice as fast as the global average. You say you are committed to combating climate change, but your government still proceeded with the purchase and approval of a new pipeline to the West Coast. Given the timeline and given what is at stake, should Canada not be moving more quickly away from further development of the oil and gas sector? And to that end, should the Trans Mountain expansion be Canada's last pipeline?
We absolutely have to move faster. We absolutely have to do more. And that's why we put forward an ambitious plan to continue that is reasonable, that is doable, and is going to make sure that we get to not just surpass our 2030 targets, but go beyond it. We're banning single-use plastics. We're putting a price on pollution right across the country. And we are fighting those conservative premiers who do not want to do their part to fight climate change. We recognize that transition to clean energy will not happen overnight. While we do, we should have less oil by rail, and we need to get to new markets so we can invest all the resources, all the money coming in from this pipeline into that green energy transition, into fighting climate change. I know that's a big piece of the way we move forward, how we invest in the new economy, in that transition. That's what we've done. The choice tonight is, do we pick a government that doesn't believe in climate change or in fighting it, or do we continue on the track we are and be even more ambitious?
Got to end it. I noticed you didn't answer the last part of that question, whether we were on our last pipeline. Mr. Bernier, your turn to debate Mr. Trudeau for 1 minute.
Mr. Trudeau, I think we agree that we don't agree on climate change. I believe that there's no climate emergency. You believe the opposite. But you won't be able to achieve the Paris Accord target. I'm not saying that. That's the UN who said that. You need to impose a carbon tax of $300 a ton, and you don't do that.
In 4 years, Mr. Bernier,
let me finish. Elizabeth, she's right.
Mr. Trudeau, let Mr. Bernier finish.
Elizabeth, she's right, and you're right. She has a radical plan to fight climate change. It will destroy the economy. But what about you?
Okay.
You won't be able to...
Mr. Bernier, Mr.
We
Trudeau's
made it three-quarters of the way to reaching those 2030 targets. Over the next 11 years, including by planting 2 billion trees, we're going to get there. But Mr. Bernier, what you don't understand, what Mr. Scheer doesn't understand, is you cannot build a plan for the future of our economy if you are not building a plan that protects the environment and fights climate change. That's where both of you are completely wrong.
Okay. Mr. Scheer, it's not your turn. Mr. Singh, your time to debate Mr. Trudeau.
Mr. Trudeau, I know that you say a lot of nice things, and you've been saying a lot of great things on this stage today. But the problem is that you said a lot of these things in 2015, and you made it sound like you're going to make climate a big priority. But the reality is you did all these things. You bought a pipeline, you continue to subsidize oil and gas, and you continue to exempt the biggest polluters. So what's it going to take now for Canadians to believe that you're actually going to follow through on your promises? What's it going to take for you to follow through on these commitments? Because your words are not good enough anymore.
Singh, we have reached three-quarters of the way to achieving our 2030 targets, and we're going to surpass them. And Mr. Singh, Canadians might be surprised to discover that your plan is to build a massive refinery in Alberta. And the only way to do that is with federal subsidies, because there's no private business case for it. Your plan to build a refinery in Alberta is worse for the environment than building a pipeline to the West Coast.
Mr. Singh,
not our plan. I don't know where you got that from. It's not our plan. We would immediately end fossil fuel subsidies. We'd immediately invest in clean energy.
That's it.
We would immediately do
That's time. Mr. Scheer, it's your turn to debate Mr. Trudeau. Same question.
When Justin Trudeau took office, there were 3 major pipeline projects ready to go. Under his watch, all of them have failed. He had to take $4.5 billion of Canadian tax money to put the Trans Mountain pipeline on life support. And he did that by sending $4.5 billion of taxpayers' money to another country, to the United States, to be invested in the oil and gas sector there instead of here in Canada. His answer for his rationale for having 2 campaign planes was that he bought carbon offsets, which is just a thing that privileged people can do to keep polluting.
Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Trudeau's chance to respond. Mr. Scheer, Mr. Scheer, Mr. Trudeau's chance to respond.
Mr. Scheer, you did not buy carbon offsets for your transport because you don't believe that climate change is real. You need to actually act.
Mr. Scheer,
you need to
no one
act
can hear you.
in a way that
Please.
is responsible, Mr. Scheer. And your plan is to rip up the only serious plan to fight climate change that Canada has ever had.
All right.
Canadians
Time's
know
up
how
for you as well,
important
Mr.
this is.
Trudeau. Ms. May, over to you.
To avoid catastrophic levels of global warming, we must double our current target. We must listen to science. We must not build the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's not the last because it gets canceled if we're serious. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't as Prime Minister, you can't as leader of the Liberal Party. There's a carbon budget. It doesn't budge. And that's why it's so heartbreaking for me to look at you today and know you could have done so much more the last 4 years. Please, God, you don't get a majority this time around because you don't keep your promises.
From the Rockies to the Bay of Fundy, Conservative premiers have gotten elected on promises to do nothing on climate change, and we need a strong federal government to fight them to make sure that we are moving forward on protecting the future generations from the impacts of climate change.
But your goal is a target for failure. When you hang on to Harper's target of 30% by 2030,
we
you
are going to pass that target, Ms.
Well,
May.
you better get to double that target, or you never get to carbon neutrality by 2050.
Time is up, Ms. May. Time is up, Ms. May. Mr. Blanchet, you can talk to Mr. Trudeau.
Mr. Trudeau, you claim to have done a lot, but Canada is the worst emitter of GHG in the G20 per capita. So that's not much of a success. But I have 2 questions from Quebec. First, will you agree with the demand of the Prime Minister of Quebec, Mr. Legault, that Quebec overview on environmental issues will have precedence over Canada's overview? Second question, do you promise after this judgment in British Columbia to not ever try to have a pipeline cross Quebec, ever?
After 10 years of Mr. Harper's failures to get things built because he did not understand you have to work with Indigenous peoples, you have to work with local communities, you have to respect environmental science, we brought in a process that does exactly that. And we work with the provinces on ensuring that there's not a duplication of environmental oversight. That's what Bill C-69 is all about. We know that the way we move forward is responsible and will be done in partnership.
And that's the time. Mr. Trudeau, it's now your chance to ask a question of any other leader. You have 1 minute to do so, sir.
We cut taxes for small businesses to 9%. We cut taxes for Canadians. We know that tax breaks for wealthy do not work to grow the economy. 10 years of Mr. Harper's failure has done that. And yet Mr. Scheer's platform, what we've seen of it, because most of it is still secret and will remain secret, apparently, like Doug Ford, that didn't work out so well for Ontarians, is to reduce taxes for the wealthiest Canadians, the multimillionaires, by $50,000, which is more money than most Canadians make in a year.
Wrap it up.
Why the $50,000
Mr. Scheer,
tax
you have
break
1 minute
for the
to
wealthiest?
respond, Mr. Scheer.
First of all, Mr. Trudeau, you seem to be oddly obsessed with provincial politics. There is a vacancy for the Ontario Liberal leadership, and if you're so focused on provincial politics, go and run for the leadership of that party, Mr. Trudeau. Secondly, your tax policy has meant that 80% of Canadian families pay higher taxes today than when you first took office. That is exactly true. That was a conservative principle that Liberals fought against, that you fought against. Your signature achievement was taking a conservative idea to send support directly to parents. I voted against your tax hikes on Canadians, Mr. Trudeau. That's what I was voting against. No, I did not.
Gentlemen, one at a time. One at a time.
We are committed to protecting that benefit because it is based on a conservative principle. But we are going to
Mr. Trudeau, this is supposed to be Mr. Scheer's answer. We're going to move into open debate.
For all Canadians with a universal tax cut. We're going to bring back the children's sports and fitness tax cut
That's it, Mr. Scheer. We've got 3 minutes on this open debate.
Starting with me.
Yes, that's right, sir.
Okay.
Off you go.
Mr. Scheer, you did not
Trudeau.
answer the question on why you were lowering taxes by $50,000 for multimillionaires in this country. Maybe you'll answer it tomorrow in the press conference, but you haven't answered it tonight.
That is just not true. You haven't answered a question your entire time as Prime Minister. I've sat across you. You never answer a question.
I answered more questions
your
in
question
the House of Commons.
I am rolling
Mr. Trudeau, let Mr. Scheer finish, please. Mr. Trudeau.
I am rolling back your tax hikes on entrepreneurs, on small business. You called them tax cheats. These are the people in our community.
For the wealthiest,
they are saving up money to open up a second location, investing in people's training and education.
No one can understand anything Mr. Blanchet wants in. Mr. Scheer, Mr. Blanchet.
You're both experts in multimillionaire. However, I have a suggestion for you. How about this idea, which has been asked unanimously by Assemblée nationale du Québec, of a single tax refund? That would save about $400 million to our combined states. Is that not a great way to save money, make things simpler for people, companies, businesses, and even government?
So you're talking about the single income tax return for Quebecers?
Yes.
I am the only federal party leader that can deliver on that, Monsieur Blanchet. That is something that I'm committed to. You might find yourself in a position where you need me to do that. I am committed to simplifying the lives of Quebecers by ensuring that they only have to fill out one single income tax.
I want to clarify something with Mr. Scheer.
Mr. Singh, yes, go ahead.
You know, Mr. Scheer, you talk a lot about tax cuts, but this is the reality. The thing is that Canadians can look across this country and see what the impacts of a conservative tax cut means. Translation, cuts to education, cuts to healthcare, vicious cuts to the most vulnerable people in society. That's what you do. The thing is, Mr. Trudeau, you sound a lot different. You sound a lot better, but you've done much of the same. You've given billions of dollars to the wealthiest,
it's
and
not
your
nothing.
top
300,000 kids out of poverty
cabinet ministers
is not nothing.
use tax havens.
Mr. Scheer, you can respond, then Mr. Bernier.
So under Trudeau's policy, Canadians are working harder and harder, but they're barely getting by or falling behind. Our policy will leave more money in their pockets, and we're going to do that, Mr. Singh, by protecting services like healthcare and education. We're going to get the money to pay for it by cutting corporate welfare and reducing Canada's foreign aid budget by 25%. That is going to pay for our tax cuts for all Canadians to leave more money in their pockets so that they can get ahead.
Mr. Bernier.
Not going to work.
Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau, it's all the same. It's all boutique tax credit. They won't cut tax for every Canadian. We have a platform with only 2 tax rates that would be fair for everybody. So everybody will save. The cost of our tax reform would be $35 billion. But we will do that only after balancing the budget. We'll use our surplus. It's the only responsible way to give more money.
I got a question.
No, you had your chance. Ms. May wants in. Ms. May.
With 2 weeks left in this election campaign, Canadians can know one thing. At this point, Mr. Scheer, with all due respect, you're not going to be Prime Minister. The question is going to be on a seat count if we have Mr. Trudeau in a minority or Mr. Trudeau in a majority. Voting for Green MPs is your very best guarantee, Canada, that you don't get the government you least want.
Mr. Scheer can respond to that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I'm going to prove you wrong on that, Ms. May. You just watch on October 21st.
I'll lay you bets right now.
Mr. Bernier said something that is completely untrue. Under Justin Trudeau, we will see endless deficits, meaning more and more of Canadian tax dollars goes to pay the interest on that debt. We will balance the budget while still preserving core services.
And it's Maxime Bernier's chance to lead this part of the debate. You can ask one question to any other leader. 30 seconds, please.
Yes. Andrew, you are calling yourself a conservative, but you don't want to balance the budget in 2 years. You will add $70 billion on our debt. You support the cartel in milk, dairy, and poultry, knowing that a Canadian family is paying more than $400 a year for that. Andrew, are you a real conservative? No, I think you are liberals. Why are you pretending to be something that you are not?
If you want to talk about pretending to be something that you're not, I'm not sure which Maxime Bernier I'm debating tonight. Was it the Maxime Bernier from the 1990s who was a separatist? Was it the Maxime Bernier who was minister responsible for handing out corporate welfare? Was it the Maxime Bernier who defended supply management when it suited him? The fact of the matter is, sorry, it's my time to respond to that question. The fact of the matter is there's a clear contrast in this election. Justin Trudeau's endless deficits and tax hikes to pay for it, or a conservative plan that will leave more money in your pocket. We will lower taxes for all Canadians. We will bring back popular tax credits like the kids, sports and fitness tax credit. We will boost the RESP. We will raise the age credit for seniors, and we will bring in a green home renovation tax credit. That all the while cutting corporate welfare and Canada's foreign aid budget to bring that money back home so that Canadians can get ahead.
9 seconds. Well, let's do open debate. Off you go. You're starting that too.
Thank you very much. I'm the Maxime Bernier who's there for Canadians. And I'm the Maxime Bernier who does not care about having real debates on real issues that are important for Canadians. You don't want to have debates on immigration. You don't want to have debates to help every Canadian and abolishing that cartel in supply management. You don't want to be able to cut foreign aid. You don't want to cut foreign aid.
Let's let Mr. Scheer respond,
it would be important to balance the budget, and we can do that.
Scheer.
Well, that's precisely not the case. I've said that we will cut Canada's foreign aid budget by 25% to pay for the tax cuts that we are going to bring in.
You can save $5 billion there and balancing the budget.
I want to just put in what this election is all about. This election is all about who's going to fight for you, who's going to stand up for you. And we've seen with Mr. Trudeau, he says nice words, but he gave $6 billion in corporate loan write-offs last year, $14 billion to the richest corporations. He keeps tax havens open, he keeps loopholes open. He hasn't closed them in 4 years. We're in it for people. We're not in it for the rich. We're going to deliver universal pharmacare for all. We're going to deliver dental care programs. We're going to invest in housing. And we're going to fight the climate crisis like we mean to win it. That's what you get with New Democrats. I ask people to support New Democrats,
Mr. Trudeau can respond.
to account this government, to form government in the next election.
We have invested in Canadians. We made a very different choice than Stephen Harper did, very different choice than Andrew Scheer is proposing. We lifted 900,000 people out of poverty. We lifted seniors out of poverty. We're putting more money in the pockets of students. And we're seeing over 1 million jobs created, most of them full-time over the past year. But there is over the past 4 years, but there is so much more to do. And that is what we have to stay focused on, because the fight against climate change, the fight for the future of our economy matters, and that's the choice Canadians need to make.
Monsieur Blanchet. Yes,
we have completely mischaracterized our response to the climate emergency as something that somehow doesn't help the economy. You have the biggest global economic opportunity in the history of humankind in moving off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But then you're keeping fossil fuels going because your target is exactly half of what's required. If this election is anything, it's about trust and ethics, and we are in a climate emergency. We need grown-ups in the room to take responsibility.
Mr. Blanchet.
Mr. Singh said that he wants to fight for Canadians, and that's a good point. Who do we want to fight for? I want to fight for Quebecers, and Quebecers only. If we agree with the Canadian government, then let it be. If we don't agree, we're going to fight. And this is what Bloc Québécois has always done. And I can't wait pour avoir ces gens-là dire en français ce qu'ils vont dire en anglais aujourd'hui, jeudi.
Ils vont le faire. Monsieur Scheer.
The fact of the matter is, under Justin Trudeau, life will continue to get more expensive. He will continue to raise taxes. His carbon tax will go up. He's afraid to tell you how much it will go up by. Under the Conservative plan, we'll balance the budget, protect core services, and lower taxes for all
Mr. Trudeau, 5 seconds to respond.
Our price on pollution helps Canadians more than removing it does.
Okay.
Climate emergency.
That's it. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this segment and to the end of this debate. We want to thank all of you, of course, for taking the time, our questioners tonight, and all of you for watching live in person and on your various screens. Just a reminder, as Monsieur Blanchet hinted at, that French language debate is later on this week, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of all my wonderful moderators and everyone here, have a good night.
ਕੁਝ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੀ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਇਸ ਮੌਕੇ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਸਨ, ਇਕੱਠੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਹੋਈ। ਵੱਖੋ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਗਏ। ਕੁੱਲ 5 ਮੁੱਦੇ ਰੱਖੇ ਗਏ ਸਨ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਜੋ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਕਰਵਾ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੇ, ਸਗੋਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਭਰ ਤੋਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਲਏ ਗਏ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਲੀਡਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਅਫੋਰਡੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੋਵੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇਨਵਾਇਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੂਬਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇਗਾ, ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਲਏ ਗਏ। ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਵਾਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਹੈ, ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਚੁਣਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ 'ਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਸਥਾਨ ਤੇ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ, ਕਿਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਬਣਨਗੇ, ਕਿਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਹੋਵੇਗੀ ਜੇਕਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਣਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਮੌਕੇ ਲਿਬਰਲਸ, ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵਸ, ਬਲੌਕ ਕਿਊਬੈਕ, NDP, ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ, ਪੀਪਲਸ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਆਫ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ 6 ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਸਨ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇਹ ਆਖਰੀ ਵਾਰ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਖਰੀ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਸੀ, ਜਿਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਡੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਵੀ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ। ਖਾਸ ਕਰ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਖੋ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਪਲੇਟਫਾਰਮਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਥਾਂ ਥਾਂ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ। ਕਈ ਥਾਈਂ ਇਸ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਸਕਰੀਨਸ ਵੀ ਲਗਾਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ। ਸਕਰੀਨਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਇਹ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਦਿਖਾਈ ਗਈ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੀਡਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪੁੱਛੇ ਗਏ। ਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਸਕਰੀਨਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਹ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਦਿਖਾਈ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ, ਉੱਥੋਂ ਚੁਣ ਕੇ, ਜੋ ਪਰਚੀਆਂ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਚੁਣ ਕੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਨੂੰ ਚੁਣਿਆ ਵੀ ਗਿਆ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਖੁਦ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੀਡਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲ ਕੀਤੇ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਦੀ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਹੋਵੇਗੀ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਥਾਨ, ਇਸ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਜਿਸ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ। ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਇਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਬੰਧਿਤ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵਪਾਰਕ ਰਿਸ਼ਤੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਧੀਆ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ, ਤੇ ਚੀਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ, ਜੋ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਤੇ ਚੀਨ ਦੇ ਦਰਮਿਆਨ ਦੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਤਾਂ ਇਸ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇਹੋ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਚੁਣੌਤੀ ਭਰਿਆ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਇਹ ਸਮਾਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਟੂਲਸ 'ਤੇ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਮਦਦ ਕਰਨ। ਤਾਂ ਇਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਦੂਜੀਆਂ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਚੀਨ ਨਾਲ ਸਬੰਧਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਜੋ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਗਏ ਵਪਾਰਕ ਸਬੰਧਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਸੰਧੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਘੇਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ। ਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਉਹ ਬਲੌਕ ਕਿਊਬੈਕ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਜੋ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ, ਪਾਰਟੀ ਲੀਡਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੀ ਗ੍ਰਿਫਤਾਰੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਜੋ ਚੀਨ ਨਾਲ ਇੰਨੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਵਰਗ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਖੇਤੀਬਾੜੀ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਲੋਕ ਇਸ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵਿਤ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਜੋ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ, ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਸਹੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਵੀ ਹੋਇਆ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ। ਤੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਇਆ ਤਾਂ ਪੀਪਲਸ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਆਫ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨੀਅਰ ਦਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਟੈਂਡ ਇੱਕੋ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਘੱਟ ਆਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜ਼ੋਰ ਪਾਇਆ ਕਿ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਡਾਈਵਰਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਣ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਘੱਟ ਆਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੀ ਤੁਲਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਯੂਰਪ ਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਆਉਣ ਕਰਕੇ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹਾਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਇਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ। ਤੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨੀਅਰ ਤੋਂ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਟਵਿੱਟਰ ਦੇ ਜ਼ਰੀਏ ਕਈ ਅਜਿਹੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਸਨ, ਕਈ ਅਜਿਹੇ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਸਨ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਵਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਘੇਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹੇ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਲਾਈਮੇਟ ਚੇਂਜ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਲੜ ਰਹੀ ਗ੍ਰੇਟਾ ਥਨਬਰਗ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਮਾਨਸਿਕ ਸੰਤੁਲਨ ਖੋ ਬੈਠੀ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਇਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜੋ ਸਵਾਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਜਵਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨੀਅਰ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਘੱਟ ਆਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤਾਂ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਸੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਜਦੋਂ ਜਗਮੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਤੋਂ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਤਾਂ ਜਗਮੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਪੁਲ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜਨ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਲੀਡਰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜਨ ਦੀ, ਇੱਕ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਚੱਲਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਇਸ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਲੀਡਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਸੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ, ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨੀਅਰ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਾਰ-ਬਾਰ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਬੋਲਣ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਿਆ। ਤੇ ਐਂਡਰਿਊ ਸ਼ੀਅਰ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਇਸੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੋਲੇ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਹੀ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਨੂੰ ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤੀ ਮਿਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਸੰਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤਾਂ ਉਸੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਐਲਿਜ਼ਾਬੈਥ ਮੇ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਉੱਤੇ ਹੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਚੰਗੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਚੰਗੀਆਂ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਆਈ ਤਾਂ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨੀਅਰ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਘੱਟ ਹੋਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟਸ ਹੋਣੇ ਬੰਦ ਹੋਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਪਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਮੈਕਸਿਮ ਬਰਨਰ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਸ਼ੀਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ, ਪਰ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਸ਼ੀਅਰ ਦੀ ਅੰਦਰੋਂ ਸੋਚ ਉਹੀ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੁਝ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਸ਼ੀਅਰ ਤੇ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਾ ਸਾਧਿਆ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਰਿਹਾ ਖਾਸ, ਤੇ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੀਆਂ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਲਾਈਵ ਅਪਡੇਟਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ TV ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਂਦੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ TV ਪੰਜਾਬ।